Hi, this is Richard Gage, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. We're delighted to have you here with us today, and I can tell you that I am pleased about the webinar series we're doing. We have 4 different webinars. We repeat them every week. Now, I am in the middle of, well, near the end now, of our Pacific Northwest tour. And I'll be showing you more about that coming up. But here we are in the great state of Montana. And we'll be in Great Falls tomorrow night. Tonight we'll be in Helena, Montana. You can find the information for this current tour of AE 9/11 Truth, where we're featuring the film Firefighters, Architects, Engineers Expose 9/11 Myths. And that's a film with Eric Lawyer and myself laying out and exposing 24 myths commonly held by the public. And so it's been going really good. We've had 5 cities in Montana, and before that, of course, Washington, Oregon, Idaho. The great Pacific Northwest is getting the truth. And I'm joined by Andy Steele, our operations coordinator. Andy, how are you today?
Oh, I'm very good. I want to thank the audience for tuning in on this webinar, and I just want to remind the audience, as I always do, to increase the resolution on the picture so you can see all the slides in the presentation. Just click on the gear box below the video, put it to 720 HD resolution. I also want to encourage people to submit their questions in the question box beneath the video. We are going to be sticking to questions about the material presented today by Richard. So if an aspect of the evidence is not covered today and you have a question about that, come to our future webinars and submit the question then. Back to you, Richard.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. And we have the Twin Towers we're going to be looking at today. I'm very excited to bring this information to you. We spoke in the last couple of weeks about World Trade Center Building 7, the 3rd skyscraper to collapse. So if you want to catch up on that material, you'll find the archive below. If you're on our website watching now, if you're not, you can go to our website at ae911truth.org and find all kinds of interesting information, evidence. You can sign our petition. You can sign up for our free news updates. And you can donate, which is very, very important for us to survive financially as an organization that's putting out educational efforts all over the place. Well, I've been an architect for 28 years, and I've designed many different types of construction, including these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums in the San Francisco Bay Area. And like other architects, I do construction administration. This one is a $125 million high school in the Bay Area as well. And then in Las Vegas, more recently, I've worked on this $400 million project with 6 blocks of retail and mid-rise office space and parking structure, altogether about 1,200 tons of fireproof steel framing. And so I have a sense of how buildings go up. And since 9/11, I've learned a lot about how buildings have come down, as have 2,500 architects and engineers now demanding a new investigation of the destruction of all 3 skyscrapers on 9/11. And so these brave individuals have put their reputations on the line and said, hey, I'm not buying it. And you're going to find out why as we proceed here with week 3. And we're going to be looking at an overview of the Twin Towers, the evidence for explosions, which is completely omitted from the NIST reports. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We'll be looking at the sudden near free-fall collapse of these buildings, high-velocity lateral ejections, the complete shattering of the steel frame from top to bottom, mid-air pulverization of about 90,000 tons of concrete. This is all evidence of explosive destruction, none of which appears in the NIST reports. Why not? Well, when the towers were built, some found this the crowning achievement of international modern architecture. Well, Others hated it. For instance, Robert Stern calls it the gigantic dumbness. He's a famous architect. You just take two squares and extrude them until they become the highest buildings in the world, right? Compare that to the beautiful Art Deco form and unfolding massing of the Empire State Building, which was the tallest building in the world prior to these towers. So these are huge, huge towers. The Twin Towers, each floor the size of a football field. Well, look how these are constructed, though, because before the Twin Towers were constructed, you had this maze, this incredible field of columns. But what the Twin Towers did is group those columns on the outside of what you see here with these perimeter exoskeleton system, which took all the lateral loading. And these welded sections were in turn then bolted to each other, which is fascinating. And what that then allowed them to do is group the rest of the columns in the core. So you have 47 massive core columns, 52 inches by 22 inches at the base, and then thinning to the lightest quarter-inch thick steel at the top. Between the two were these spanned these lightweight steel trusses over which was poured reinforced concrete. So this is a 60-foot open office planning for the first time in engineering or architecture and engineering history. We have wide open spaces, as you can see here, no columns in 35 feet on the side, 60 feet span in the middle. This was a crowning achievement. It was what it was. This particular aspect of the design, allowing for these incredible open vistas. Problem with these was that you had only a 9-foot ceiling, and as you can see there, we have marching columns all the way around the outside, so you don't have the large expanse of glass. So this is one of several reasons many researchers find that these towers were not only half occupied at the time of 9/11. It was a white elephant. The city of New York was forcing the Port Authority before that ownership transferred to Larry Silverstein and Company just 6 weeks prior to 9/11. The city was forcing the Port Authority to abate the asbestos in this building according to federal law. So we have a building that was purchased for $3.2 billion, but only 125 million was actually put in by Mr. Silverstein, leading many to suspect all kinds of different things. But what we're looking at is the actual science of the buildings. But what we have here is a 100,000-ton heat sink in this massive steel building. This is the reason skyscrapers don't come down due to fires, and never have since 9/11 or before. Even though we've had 100 large, long-lasting, and very hot fires in these types of buildings, the heat is drawn, conducted away from its source, keeping that temperature from reaching its critical temperature of 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the point where steel can lose half of its strength. We'll come back to those points. Let's find out first what happened on 9/11 and how the official story was developed.
On September 11th, we learned that 4 passenger planes were hijacked and taken radically off course. Within an hour, 2 of the planes had flown into the enormous steel towers of the World Trade Center, creating fires and eventually toppling them. Dazed by the news, the American public soon believed the fires in the towers had burned so hot they caused the steel frames of the buildings to give way. A myth developed, fed by official sources through the media to a bewildered audience. Elements of the myth: the impact of the airplanes, gallons of burning jet fuel, steel melting, the buildings failing and suddenly imploding. In a mere 10 seconds, 110 stories hurtled earthward, pulverizing into dust. Right from the start, on the street itself, the official story was born.
Come out of nowhere and just scream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
The myth bled into the FEMA report and was echoed by the experts.
It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire, that caused collapse.
Well, let's test that theory. That's basically the official theory in a nutshell. Very, very interesting. Right off the street, a year before the officials kind of came into, well, many years in the case of the NIST reports before they came to agreement about what really happened there. Well, in the West for the last 100 years, we have something called the scientific method. We all learned it in 7th grade. We have a question. How did the towers came down, in this case, come down? We do some background research. How have other towers come down? We make some observations. We construct our hypothesis. This is our best guess as to how it came down. And we don't automatically just zero in on one hypothesis. We look at all the rational hypotheses laid out and objectively. That's the purpose of science, is objectivity here. So we can make some predictions based on those hypotheses and what would happen if this were true. We test the hypotheses with experiments, the predictions, and find out, okay, is that true? Analyze the results. We draw conclusions. If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner. And we'll see that NIST has done anything but that. In fact, we'll see that they have done anything but lay out all the hypotheses objectively. They went straight for the hypothesis of destruction by fire and jet fuel, and to some extent the jet plane impacts, ignoring the evidence for explosions, as we'll see. If the hypothesis is not corroborated, what do? We go back, we try again, and we find a hypothesis that stands a better chance against the evidence, experiments, and so forth. Well, with that in mind, let's look at the actual investigations that have been done real quick. Right away, we had volunteers coming forth to analyze what happened to these buildings from the American Society of Civil Engineers. And they had a report which developed into the FEMA report in 2002. We looked at the Appendix C of that report last week, and we will be looking at it in next week as well when we get to week 4 in greater detail. But they had about $600,000 in funding, and we'll see what they came up with. The Silverstein-Weidlinger report came out in 2002, but it was not made public. There was some lawsuits going on, and it was used to support Larry Silverstein's effort to defend himself against the Con Edison substation electrical utility, well, excuse me, that I'm mixing that up with the 2005 report for Building 7. We'll come back to that when we start with World Trade Center 7. But this report regarding the Twin Towers was not made public. And in 2005, finally, we have the final report, $20 million in funding, took 3 years. We'll take a good look at that report today. But what's most interesting about these individuals who worked on these independent projects is that they're not independent at all, because most of them showed up right away in the FEMA report and worked their way, controlling the subsequent reports, right into Popular Mechanics, who had an effort to derail those who were questioning the 9/11 official reports of these buildings' destruction. So we'll be looking at a few of their greatest hits from Popular Mechanics. But the official story tells us that these fires created by the jet fuel, Now, NIST says most of the jet fuel burned up outside the buildings after the planes hit, 90% of it. And the rest of it, 10%, is burned up in 10 minutes, starting office fires. So basically, in the Twin Towers, we have office fires as a theory of this destruction, of the destruction of this building. And some column damage, but substantially office fires, which they say caused the lightweight steel floor trusses to sag. And that happens because the impact of the airplanes was said to have knocked off the fireproofing from them, making them more vulnerable to fire. Well, they then say that this caused the perimeter columns to bow inward. And there was some bowing inward noticed on the Twin Towers. The question is, what caused it? Can sagging floor trusses cause bowing inward of external columns? No, they can't. There's very, very little lateral force. So what does NIST do in their computer model? They apply an artificial 5,000-pound force on every column around the building, forcing the columns to fail, allowing then this upper 15-story section to then drive the rest of the building down to the ground, and then it somehow crushes itself. We'll look at that theory later. Until we get there, though, what we're going to realize is that we're looking at the evidence for explosive demolition, the characteristic features and non-characteristic features in the case of the Twin Towers of explosive demolition. You see, we're being told that these buildings came down by jet plane impacts and fires. So we are looking for evidence, in this case, the evidence that does not support that theory, and there's plenty of it, starting with evidence of explosions. Where? At the base of the structure? No, not like Building 7, but at the point of jet plane impacts, because that is the deception that we've uncovered. Not we in the 9/11 Truth Movement generically. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth showed up 4 years late on the scene. I had bought the official story hook, line, and sinker, like many. And in 2006, finally, I was alerted by an interview with David Ray Griffin, in which I learned of all of this evidence we're going to be sharing with you in today and in the subsequent weeks on this four-part webinar series. So what we're looking for here then, and what I learned about from David Ray Griffin on the radio that day 10 years ago, is that there are sounds of explosions heard by witnesses, hundreds of them. There are flashes of light. And so we're going to be looking for that as we proceed down our list of characteristic features. Starting with the oral histories, which were compiled by Fire Commissioner Thomas von Essen, 12,000 pages, 500 FDNY, firefighters, emergency medical technicians, and they were recorded, starting a month after 9/11 to preserve the accounts before they became reshaped by a collective memory. Now, this was being hidden by the city, but finally, the New York Court State of Appeals forced the city to release this information, these 500 accounts, audio accounts. So the New York Times publishes it. David Ray Griffin does a fascinating lecture on it, and he's interviewed by Bonnie Faulkner in KPFA's Guns and Butter program in the Berkeley Bay Area. It's fascinating what I heard that day. Is I had never heard any alternative theory as to how these towers came down before that day. I mean, I was shocked. I had to pull my car over. I said, I got to know what's going on here. This was like being hit in the head with a 2x4. And I'm going, I would have heard about this by now. Well, there's a lot of reasons I didn't. And there's a lot of reasons I didn't know about Building 7. And most architects and engineers know nothing about it either. Or these 118 firefighters, which are observing sounds of explosions, flashes of light being blown around the building with these explosions. Like this gentleman, we felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. So all of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train was under my feet. Then the next thing you know, look up and the tower's collapsing. So they're hearing and feeling these explosions first. Then this debris starts flying and they see the building coming down. It shook my bones. This is 1,300 feet below the top of the towers where all this is going on. Feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. One explosion under in the south tower, one floor under another. I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a deliberate, synchronized kind of thing. Wow, what are they talking about? Well, we're going to hear some of them. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it's going all the way around like a belt, all these explosions. Now, none of this testimony appeared in any of the final reports of NIST. Why not? Let's take a look at the North Tower. Compared to a known explosive demolition on the left, is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity with the sudden onset, the near symmetrical destruction, to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like one? And no high-rise has ever come down due to fire, ever? You can begin to see that this is not a scientific effort that NIST was engaged in here. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. The flash just kept popping all the way around the building, and the building had started to explode. Maybe like this in the South Tower on the right, a known controlled demolition on the left. Again, is there any similarity? Enough to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Slowing it down to half speed here. Sudden onset of destruction. No jolt. No time required for those columns below to give way. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was. A crackling explosive. How about these guys?
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the...
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion.
Much, much lower.
It just went boom, like a bomb went off. And another explosion came right on it because they were flying.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
No, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
There was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
That the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is
A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
It sounded like gunfire. You know, bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion. We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, building 2 was collapsing.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down.
All of a sudden you hear an explosion and you could see the building starting to collapse.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, that we are told collapsed because of a third explosion.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the Second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions.
And then you heard from far away, boom, boom. And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if it had detonated.
Yeah,
detonated. They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
From the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. And I sat there and watched a few of them explode. And it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
How many of these witnesses do you imagine ended up in the official reports or even mentioned in the official building reports by NIST? Zero. Well, NIST says it couldn't have been a controlled demolition because controlled demolitions start from the top. Well, let's listen.
You can go almost anywhere in the structure, and given the right circumstances, you can release all of that stored energy, converting into what is called kinetic energy. That's energy in motion, and that's what brings the building down.
Of course, I meant from the bottom, but here you can see controlled demolitions can be started anywhere. In that case, from the top down. So NIST's theory is that this upper 15-story section drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. Well, let's take a look at this carefully. What happens when a Volkswagen runs into a Mack truck? Newton's third law of motion tells us there's an equal and opposite reaction, i.e. destructive force. The Volkswagen might dent the bumper, but it's going to be completely destroyed before it gets to the engine or through the engine, right? This is obvious and intuitive. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen on top of the Mack truck? No. The lighter part of the structure cannot destroy the heavy, cold, intact, hard, heavier steel below, steel frame. No way. So there would be destruction that would be equal to both bodies for some time. Let's take a look. Here's the North Tower, and it begins suddenly and collapses in a telescoping manner. The upper part is destroyed, in fact, in the first 4 seconds. Let's take a look here. As you can see, the upper part is destroying itself. That is to say, that is exactly what's happened. The Volkswagen is either colliding with something below and destroying itself, or something else is destroying it. But it's not available to do any destruction after that. As a mass, it cannot drive the rest of the building down. Take a look here as a close-up. We start and we stop. We have explosive ejections starting and stopping, just like the fireman said, like a belt. All these explosions all the way around the building symmetrically in this sudden, smooth descent. Let's take a look here and see if we have any block available that's driving the rest of the building down, according to Zdeněk Bezant in his paper, which came out 2 days after 9/11, with all kinds of theoretical mathematical theories as to show how this upper block drove the rest of the building down and then destroyed itself. And you can see in no photos, no videos, any block driving the rest of the building down. It is gone in the first 4 seconds, as you saw. In fact, after that, it looks more like a volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea on the right. And you can compare them, upward, outward, arching streamers, geometry of fireworks here. This is indicative of an explosion. Just ask yourself, what am I seeing? Am I seeing a collapse or an explosion? Everybody gets this, but take a look below. Numerous isolated explosive ejections, as we'll see, 20 stories here down below, but way down below, as we'll see in a minute. But look on the lower right of this video, which shows the corner of the building with rapidly advancing explosive ejections almost as fast as the freely falling objects from above. In fact, this is clocked by math teacher David Chandler, who documents that it at times is advancing faster than the freely falling objects. What about the South Tower? The South Tower was hit about 30 stories down, and as you can see, it begins to tip over. In fact, it's tipping at 22 degrees off of its vertical axis. So it's falling off the building. So we have asymmetrical loading from this mass that's falling off the building. We have asymmetrical damage from the airplane impacts. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires. But look from below. We have complete symmetrical explosions. We'll call it symmetrical destruction, all the way down, advancing uniformly from top to bottom, shattering the structure completely. Look, take a close-up look. What am I looking at? This is the question we all have to ask ourselves. Am I seeing a collapse, or am I seeing, in this case, hundreds of explosions? And completely shattering the structure all the way down to the ground. The shattering of the structure is one of the key indicative features of an explosion that the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, requires us to look at. We'll be looking at that more next week. Take a look at the steel that's damaged, beams flayed out, deeply reddened and oxidized, concave on one side, convex on the other, indicating a side concussive blast, perhaps, in a lot of these, the ends of these core columns, and a massive amount of heat, thousands of degrees it takes to turn these beams into noodle shapes, basically. We'll take a look at the cause of that heat next week, next Sunday. Do we have a straight down symmetrical progression outside the footprint? Again, in Building 7, inside the footprint. Twin Towers, it's very different. We have a 200-foot wide tower, but all of this material, 4-ton structural steel sections, are ejected laterally, landing 600 feet in every direction, well outside the boundaries of ground zero, impaling themselves on local buildings and doing damage, as you can see at the top here, to World Trade Center 7, which we'll look at again in a couple of weeks. It filled the complex completely. Well, what about these squibs, or isolated explosive ejections? Take a look in this building where we show here, here, and here. 20, 40, even 60 stories down below this zone of destruction, we have these explosives, which in many of these videos you can see are full of pulverized building materials. These are not puffs of air, as NIST claims. If these were puffs of air being driven down by that piston or that pile driver, that 15-story section in the case of the North Tower, we would be having that air come down the elevator shafts, and it equalize in pressure in the open office that you saw earlier. And it would blow out all the windows, or none of them, but not these highly focalized, pinpoint accurate, violent ejections that are occurring at 200 feet per second, the speeds of explosives, not projected air. Take a look at the squibs on the left side of the South Tower. Almost immediately at its destruction, on almost every floor, you see these ejections of material as soon as the building starts to go down. So what about these squibs? Let's listen to physics teacher David Chandler.
As the South Tower begins to explode, we track 2 squibs near the bottom of the frame. They shoot out quickly at first, then slow and merge in with the rest of the dust cloud. Using the first few data points, we see the first squib shoots out at 44.98 meters per second, or about 100 miles per hour. Doing the same for the second squib, we at a speed of 56.3 meters per second, which works out closer to 126 miles per hour.
And that, my friends, is the speed of explosives, not air pressure. So we have these focalized ejections that are occurring in the midpoints of the facade quite often. Here, obviously, looking more like engineering, and they're pulverized building materials, as you can see the solids in these photos, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. Yeah, it is coming apart piece by piece. There are very, very few. There's nothing recognizable as a building save those shards of steel at the bottom. It's completely broken up and distributed outside the perimeter, which you see highlighted here in white. Broken up 37.5-foot lengths, ready for loading and shipment. Those are the original column lengths. Lateral ejection of structural steel. Well, take a look. These are isolated, freely flying structural steel sections, and they are not, it's not like a banana peeling. That's not how they got their distance. Look here, this is a freely flying structural steel section, 45 degrees, back 2, 3, forward 2, 3, back 2, 3, forward 2, 3. Gravity works down, not out. What is the lateral component or force causing this lateral ejection? Can only be explosives. So sending these units, destroying the Winter Garden 600 feet away, as you can see here on the right, that is an incredible lateral ejection. Enough force to send a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. Now, there were 110 floors in this building. Each of them were an acre in size. They should be seen stacked up at the bottom of this gravitational collapse, as we're told. They are not. What we see, in fact, what we hear from Thomas Patrizio, he says, hey, I put 6,000 of those floor panels. You saw those being erected in place in the earlier part of this talk today. He put 6,000 of them, but he couldn't find one of them when he came back. Where are they? Look at this. On the left side, you see a 2-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns. No stacked pancakes like you see on the right in a real gravitational collapse, in this case, in Mexico. Where are the missing floors? Where's the 220 acres total of steel decking in which this concrete was placed? Do we have pyroclastic-like clouds of pulverized concrete? Well, we're missing concrete. Where's the concrete at the bottom? 90,000 tons of concrete is missing. Well, it's pulverized in midair. That's what you see in all these photos. And you see it developing right off the bat. Pulverization. That takes incredible explosive force because it's blown into 100 micron particles average in this dust, which is layered throughout lower Manhattan in a 4-inch thick blanket of powdered concrete. Yes, up to 30% of this dust is concrete. That's where the floors are. What caused the incredible force to pulverize all that concrete?
And you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel. What happened to the concrete? The concrete was pulverized. And I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust powder 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
That's the governor of New York, and very helpful.
What I expected to see was nothing like what I actually did see at the time of my arrival at the site. There wasn't much that you could say, you could describe. Everything was dust and metal. There was no typewriters, there was no chairs, there was no nothing.
Well, there were about 10,000 file cabinets that should have been found. This is the only one that they did find. The only one. It was in the basement. What would happen? Would expect these to be flattened and found between floors, along with the bodies. But what happened to the bodies?
In April 2006, New Yorkers were distressed to learn that bone fragments, human remains from 9/11, had been found on the roof of the nearby Deutsche Bank building.
And how, in God's name, did those fragments get there?
And bone fragments less than a centimeter long. How could they be so small?
Wait a minute. We have 700 bone fragments, the size of a half an inch long, found on this building over here, the Deutsche Bank building. Well, they didn't come from the people in this plane that hit the South Tower, because their ejections and the plane ejections went out this way. They didn't come from the people in the plane in the North Tower, because those ejections are blocked by the North Tower. So somehow on the top of a skyscraper, we have blown to bits, just like the concrete powder, just like the file cabinets, just like the desks and chairs and computers, none of which were found in any recognizable sized piece. This is extraordinary. Well, we had 2,749 victims in these towers, but only 300 whole bodies were found. Many of those were the jumpers that we've heard so much about, seen. 20,000 pieces of bodies were found. That's amazing. And even so, 6,000 of them were small enough to fit into a test tube. But even so, 200 pieces were matched to one single person. But we're still missing 1,151 victims, no DNA. These are people who were vaporized in this process. We would expect all those victims to be found in some shape, stacked again between floors. What could be responsible? Look at the massive distribution of these victims, spread far further, much further than the structural steel elements. They are all over the place, 1,000 feet away in some cases. Can gravitational collapse cause such incredible body pulverization and distribution? We don't think so. We believe that the hypothesis is corroborated of the explosive demolition hypothesis. And we believe that we are accounting for all 10 key characteristics of explosive destruction in this week's webinar and next week's webinar with regard to the Twin Towers. This is direct evidence of explosive destruction. We don't believe fire can account for any one of these, let alone all 10 of them. And with additional corroborative evidence, which we'll be looking at much more in next week's webinar, this is all proof of controlled demolition beyond a reasonable doubt. Now you get a sense of why there's 2,500 architects and engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation, and why we are doing everything we can at AE 9/11 Truth to advance the education of the professionals, the media, the government, and citizens. That's why we're on a tour through the Pacific Northwest right now. We want you to work with us. Sign the petition. It's right on our website there, ae911truth.org. You can become a member. We encourage people to support us so that we can go out and do the work that you've entrusted us to do for the last 10 years. And that takes resources. And so people who have joined us are standing with us. They're making their stand. They may not be able to do everything we're doing or have the knowledge base that we have or the resources, but they can donate at as little as $5 a month, $7.50 a month. Some are at $100 a month. There's various levels to make it work for you. You can donate also one time online at AE 9/11 Truth, and you can volunteer. In fact, Andy, we've got some volunteer opportunities right now, don't we?
Oh, we always do. We got a lot of projects going on, stuff that is getting this information out to professionals, people in government, those who need to hear about it. So if you're hearing about this for the first time and you are moved by this evidence, or even if it's not the first time that you're hearing about it, but you're ready to do something, just go to the top of this webpage that you're likely watching this on right now, ae911truth.org. There should be a tab there that says what you can do. You click that and another tab appears. It says volunteer. You simply fill out the form and we will get back in touch with you and get you on a project, and you can also contribute your own ideas as well. So please volunteer.
Yeah, definitely. We need the help. Andy does a lion's share of the work around here, and we also have 3 or 4 staff. And there are many other volunteers doing many things throughout the country on behalf of and using the AE 9/11 Truth resources. What they're doing, many of them are contacting their elected representatives, letting people know that television, radio, newspaper, we can write a letter to the editor. We've done 550 radio and TV interviews in the last 10 years, and it's picking up. We keep getting demands for more. I did a radio interview this morning, and statewide throughout Montana. We reached 10,000 people this morning, and hopefully some of them will be in Great Falls and Helena, where we will be tonight in Helena and tomorrow in Great Falls. But tell everyone you know. Send the ae911truth.org link to everyone you know, every architect you can find. This is a grassroots movement. It's growing, but it's not growing fast enough, in my personal opinion. We all need to be doing something, and this is something you can do right from your own computer. Share the DVDs. We have some incredible DVDs. I'm going to show you one right now. And invite people to come to your living room. Say, hey, here's 2,500 architects and engineers. They seem credible. Let's listen to them, see what they have to say. Use us. You know, you don't have to extend your credibility beyond your comfort zone. We're sticking our necks out for you, but use us. This is one of our prime resources. It's a 52-page booklet, Beyond Misinformation. One version of it, the hard copy comes with it. The DVD I'm going to show you. It's extraordinary. It's been distributed to 20,000 architects and engineers throughout the country. And we have given it out 50,000 times. And the DVD that comes with it is called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. That is to say, let me go back a step. You can get this 50-page booklet, the PDF of it, sent to you right now. Just click on the link below, free booklet. And so and you can email that to everybody, right? Especially architects, engineers, and others. It's not too technical, but it is more technical than our brochure. And we have hundreds of brochures you can get on our website. We have 3 brochures. You can get hundreds of them and hand them out like candy. You can get this DVD, which is also available, by the way, on YouTube, the 1-hour version for free. But let me show you the 3-minute version of it, the documentary trailer here.
Theories, they can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the documents from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack, the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red grade crystals are very high temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
And yes, you can organize a screening right in your own home. You can send the link to the free 1-hour version of this film, an extraordinary film, which includes 8 psychologists examining why this information is so difficult for people to even be willing to look at. And once they look at it, why they have a complete case of indigestion with regard to the material that they've just taken in. So there's a lot to learn there. I know that this film has been seen now by more than 1 million people, and there's another film that is being seen by almost that many people. Firefighters, architects, engineers expose 9/11 myths. Eric Lawyer, who founded Firefighters for 9/11 Truth and has 200 firefighters calling for a new investigation. He and I were recorded in this historic presentation in which he and I expose 24 myths commonly held or put out by the government or the media. It gives much of the evidence that you've seen, plus more, a lot more, from the firefighter side. The National Fire Protection Association Manual 921 has gone through in detail. And that's what we're taking through the United States. We've been through the Southwest, we've been through the Northeast, and now we are in the Northwest on a 13-city tour. And again, tonight in Helena, Montana, and tomorrow night in Great Falls completes our Northwest tour. But then we go on to Philadelphia, where we will be on the floor with the American Institute of Architects National Convention, having submitted a resolution co-sponsored by 97 of our AIA members, petition signer members. They will be with us making the case in at least a 10-minute debate, what amounts to on the floor with the top 400 people in the American Institute of Architects. And there we will be calling for the AIA to call for a new World Trade Center 7 investigation. And we're following on the footsteps of last year's convention, and we have some plans to make sure that we do a whole lot more effective job of getting them to see the evidence and to respond and vote for this resolution. So we need support with that project. That's a $20,000 effort to bring some of our top people to Philadelphia to house them, feed them, and get them their flights, and a $5,000 booth with our Building 7 shown on a big screen both ways, coming down again and again. And we say, do you know what that is? And they say, yeah, that's a controlled demolition. They almost all get it, right, when they see it. But unfortunately, most architects and engineers know nothing about this third worst structural failure in modern history. So there we then say, well, did you know when this happened? It happened on 9/11. No, yeah, this is the third tower. You know, we start to have a conversation. We get 100 to 200 petitions signed, and it's an extraordinary opportunity. We get more co-sponsors for next year's resolution, whatever it might be. So support us. Click on the donate button and just write in there for AIA convention. That's coming right up the 19th, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 of May. And right after that, we do the Southeast tour. We hope to have 10, 13 cities in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina. Then we do the Midwest. Yes, we're coming to the Midwest the first 2 weeks of July. And then we go on to Canada the first 2 weeks of August. And then we are in New York the weekend of 9/11. We've got some exciting projects there, including some legal efforts that I know you'll be excited about. We'll be announcing soon. So all of that is happening. And this presentation, week 3, that you just saw, will be repeated again. And actually, I might have that wrong. I think next week we're on week 4. But you can see the schedule right down on the website there. And if that's true, and I think it is, on Thursday we start week 4, Twin Towers and Extreme Heat. We have the Twin Towers overview, pyroclastic-like clouds, molten steel and iron microspheres, thermite, nanothermite, all evidence for destruction of the towers by incendiaries. And we looked at today at the evidence for the destruction of the Twin Towers by explosives. There's a combination of things going on here. So at this point, I want to invite you to submit your questions on our website, ae911truth.org. If you're listening live, you can submit your questions right there. And I'll bet you, Andy, we already have some great questions for me.
Oh, we do. And there's one that came in while the trailer was playing that we're going to start off with, asking about the remarks Obama is making about science being undermined to push ideological agendas. And it's asking, was he speaking about 9/11 at that moment?
Well, we would love to imagine that he was. He did not. I mean, he cited some examples, and 9/11 was not one of them. But the principle that he is highlighting here is extremely valid for us. So I wanted people to hear the President of the United States saying that science in the government, and it continues, by the way, under the Obama administration, just as bad as it ever was under the Bush and previous administrations. Science is subverted to support ideological agendas of those in political power and those who have the money. And the money, in the case of 9/11, it needs to be followed. We want, yes, AE 9/11 Truth wants the perpetrators brought to accountability. We're not criminal investigators, though. We don't have subpoena power. We can't force them into giving testimony. We need immunity offered. We need testimony taken under oath. We don't have these powers. Now, Congress has these powers, and if Congress will not give us such an investigation, we will remove them. And we have that power only when you, every one of you, do everything you can to tell everybody you know that 9/11 was not what we were told it was. It is obviously a false flag operation, which means it was done purposefully, and we speculate, based on what happened after 9/11, that it was done to manipulate the American people into going to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and perhaps to remove our civil liberties as well, which we have fought long and hard for early on in this country. So people say, well, why would they do this? Well, this is not the question that was asked, but it's been on my heart a lot lately as I'm traveling through Montana, the hotbed of the patriotic community, which is demanding a new investigation of 9/11, in which we are speaking to these different groups. In Spokane, we had the whole Tea Party come out and listen, 95 of them. And so conservative groups are really showing up on the Northwest Tour, and we'll speak to anybody, right, the left, liberals, conservatives. We'll support any candidate who says, I want a new investigation. Have we heard that? No, not really. There's some inklings of it. Let's keep our ear tuned, though. Another question, Andy?
Sure. And I just want to say, I believe I chased those remarks down, or that quote down, to remarks made by Obama at the National Academy of Sciences annual meeting in April of 2009. So that's where I think it came from. Next question asks, is it possible to extrapolate how many pounds of explosive material it would take to demolish each individual building?
Well, in the case of the Twin Towers, it's pretty obvious that we have high energy explosives in addition to very effective thermite, which we'll show next week. There are thermite cutter charges. By looking at the residue, and next week we'll Thursday, starting Thursday, we'll be looking at the evidence for incendiaries, and there's enough of it in the dust found by the residue of ignited thermite found by and documented by officials, the USGS, etc. You see that next week. But there's about 10 tons of this material, and that is just the ignited residue. There's unignited residue amounting to about 10 tons of nanothermite by extrapolation, based on how many they find in the samples that they have. That's 20 tons of ignited and unignited thermite. So we're talking a substantial portion of material, which it would have to be rolled in through security. So we certainly want an investigation of the security company, Kroll, Associates, Securicom, Stratesec. We want an investigation of the elevator company, which happened to have a 9-month elevator modernization going on, the largest one in the world, and Ace Elevator had this contract. We certainly want an investigation of that company, who had 85 employees. This is their largest job ever, by the way. They need to be investigated. They came out of nowhere to get this contract, taking it from Otis Elevator, who installed these elevators and who had been maintaining them. Anyway, this is quite a scandal, because these 85 employees fled when the first plane hit the tower, and they were not sticking around at all to help the firefighters rescue these victims. These are experts in the elevators, which are the rescue vehicles for these people. Andy?
Sure. The next question is, how many of the actual witnesses on that day have you interviewed? Like, have we actually interviewed ourselves? They're asking.
Oh, there's a number of witnesses. Rudy Dent is a striking example. Firefighter who was on the pile, who actually saw Building 7 come down that afternoon. He's got an extraordinary interview also on YouTube. You can just search on YouTube, Rudy Dent, D-E-N-T. Extraordinary. He's seen by 1 million people now. No, almost 2 million, I think now. It's amazing. And there's been other, everywhere I go, it seems, almost everywhere I go, somebody will come up and say, I was in New York. You know, I saw I've personally talked to 10 people who saw the planes hit the towers. So we know there were planes, because that comes up once in a while as a question. And there's others who said, I saw the towers come down, I was there. So it's not our job to document that. Our job is to document the scientific evidence that proves that these towers were brought down, not by jet plane impacts and jet fuel and so forth, but by explosive and incendiary demolition.
And I've also interviewed people. David Long is a Canadian who was there, and I've talked to him, and a lot of people call our office and talk to us too about their experience on 9/11.
Yeah, David Long is one of those Canadians, well, one of those people who happens to be a Canadian who actually saw molten iron pouring out of the South Tower, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And again, that interview is online if people want to look it up. Our next question is, what other science trades are represented on your petition besides architects and engineers?
We have 2,500 architects and engineers. They have architecture and engineering degrees. We verify them very, very carefully. They have to show us the diploma, and we verify it. There are 20,000 others who have signed our petition. And among these are all different kinds of scientists, firefighters, policemen, current and former military personnel, including military officers, many pilots. You can see and search on our website in the sign the petition section for these various people. Do we have them categorized there? I'd forgotten, Andy. It's been a while now since I've gone to the petition.
It's yeah, I haven't looked myself, so I will have to get back on that. But the people's occupation, a lot of times, I believe, is listed, and I believe that others have categorized it for us. And there's also different people who have spoken out. But if you watch the movie Experts Speak Out, and I encourage everyone to do that, it lists what they do. And it's not just architects and engineers. That's the niche that we represent, but there are people, like Richard has said, physics people, people in chemistry. So in the Experts Speak Out movie, it lists their profession and what they have to bring to this debate. So I encourage everyone to watch that, and you'll get an idea of how well-rounded our scientific petition signers are.
Great.
The last question we're going to ask today is, how many government officials are with you in this endeavor to reopen the investigation?
Oh, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20, 30, maybe 100, or is it up to 800 now, Andy?
Well, we have a lot of them. I don't have the exact number off my and I can actually answer this to a certain extent because we've had people give some very positive responses on live television, including Congressman McDermott. I'm not sure if he's still in office, but he said that these questions that we're asking about Building 7 are valid and that they should look into it. The sooner the better, in his opinion. There are also people who are currently running for office that are behind us and have answered candidate surveys that are being sent out indicating that. So there's a lot of positive signs out there that people are opening their eyes, and that when we stick to the science and to the points that Richard is raising here, we go a lot further.
And of course, I was joking when elected representatives seem not to want to touch this. Andy highlighted Jim McDermott. Jim Hines from Connecticut wrote us a letter to NIST, and basically NIST wrote back and said, "Don't worry, we looked at this thermite theory, and there's nothing to it, and we couldn't get anything to happen there." And the only representative that we've had supporting us has been Cynthia McKinney, former congresswoman from Georgia, and she does an extraordinary job. And we've got to put massive pressure on our elected representatives so that we can get some. And these candidates, presidential and otherwise, encouraging them, forcing them to deal with everybody who should be going to these campaign speeches and putting pressure on them, asking them, do you support the family members' demand for a new investigation of the destruction of these towers? Do you support a new investigation of World Trade Center Building 7? That's a smoking gun. That's the one that everybody gets immediate awareness of, that we've been not told the truth about 9/11. So I guess that's our last question, Andy. I want to encourage everybody to come back for week 4 next week as we take on the Twin Towers and all this evidence, fascinating evidence for the extreme hot temperatures that are found more so by official sources than others like ourselves. We just compile it. We just show what they've already found. For the most part, it's very revealing. And until then, get the word out. Send the ae911truth.org link to every architect and engineer you can find. Send this link for the webinar. This will be archived, today's program. You can send it to everybody you know. That's what's going to make a difference. Okay, thanks so much, everybody, and we will catch up on Thursday.